Yesterday, we had a guy that released a video, and he wanted me to watch it on my stream. I did watch the first part. People really liked it a lot. And so we're now going to watch the second part. Here we go. Let's take a look at it. Bro, is it 7K subs? Oh my God. He had 200 yesterday. Oh, wow. Yeah, he had like 232 or something. Wow. Oh, great. Well, good for him. Deserves it.
Hey, everyone. Before we dive into part 2, I just want to give a massive thank you for all the love and support that I received on my first video. At the time of recording this, I have over 4,000 views and just over 100 subscribers on YouTube.
Damn. And this video was from 2 days ago. Wow.
Thank you so much for all the support. If you haven't seen it yet, I recommend watching part 1 as I tackle very important topics there that I won't necessarily dive deep into here. It's been incredible to read your comments and all your feedback, and I love seeing how many of you are just as passionate about these topics as I am. I'm excited to keep this conversation going, so let's dive into it. Let's start with something that's actually going right in the gaming world. Indie and smaller game studios. While a lot of big AAA publishers often disappoint, most indie developers have been stepping up with innovation and creativity.
That's true. I've been playing Core Keeper off stream. I'm almost done with everything in the game. I got level 100 in my melee skills last night, and I've been farming. I got magic to 100 as well, and summoning. Like, I've been putting in work, boys. I've been putting in real work. I'm almost done.
Last video, I praised Palworld for scratching an itch we've been waiting years for Pokemon to scratch. That's the power of these smaller studios. They're not tied down by corporate greed. They can take risks and create experiences that truly resonate with the community. We all want to see companies like Nintendo flourish. After all, they gave us so much of our childhood with their iconic games. But here's the problem. They've become the exact thing their games often paint as a villain. A greedy corporate empire stomping on the little guy. Just look at how Nintendo is handling.
I wish that, like, they made a game for Waluigi where all he would do is go around and commit very, very mild crimes. Like, order food from a drive-thru and then drive away and not pay for the food and then just leave. Just like little, like, jaywalking, right? And just, like, basically be a public nuisance. You know, jerk, basically, yeah, just tomfoolery. Exactly. Like, go into, like, people's shopping carts and put things in their shopping carts while they're not noticing.
Palworld. Instead of seeing it as healthy competition or even inspiration, they chose to sue the developers over patents that Nintendo only released after Palworld came out.
That's crazy. I can't even believe that happened.
Corporate greed at its finest.
I don't even think that it's corporate greed. I think that it's straight fucking, like, corporate terrorism. Like, what they're doing. So you're spending money, you're setting a patent up after the fact so you can retroactively sue something that existed before the patent was filed. It's ridiculous.
Just about competition. It's about creating an environment where creativity can thrive. These indie developers are a beacon of hope in a landscape that can often feel dominated by cookie-cutter sequels and franchise fatigue.
True.
Rather than fostering creativity, big corporations are trying to squash it. It's ironic because the developers of Palworld obviously have huge
That's also a huge component too. Is that as companies get more and more of these patents in gaming, what that ultimately results in is that there are less games that you can play that have unique tools because, like, it's no longer a collaborative process where games get better over time. It's a process where games actually get worse over time and more fragmented because of IP.
Respect for what Nintendo has done in the past. You can see that respect in the same way they crafted a world.
I cannot believe how do you, like, if this, so I feel like I should be watching a Kira TV video about how this is the latest Kickstarter scam. How the fuck did Nintendo release this? It's insane.
Reminiscent of Pokemon, but with a fresh creative twist. And the guns. It's sad to see a company that is so loved by so many people now playing the role of a villain.
A man chooses. A slave obeys.
Ooh.
Now, I want to talk about a sensitive topic. Politics in games.
Uh-oh.
Here's the thing. Games are made by humans, and humans have worldviews. So naturally, politics are going to seep into the stories and themes. The issue here isn't whether or not games should tackle political topics. It's how these themes are communicated, and whether they serve the story and gameplay. Spec Ops The Line is a perfect example of how to do it right. For those who don't know what Spec Ops The Line is, I
think Metal Gear Solid is a perfect example of how to do it right. I mean, look at Metal Gear Solid. I think there's plenty of games that do it right. It's just the issue. I think that politics in games... I think that the problem is that when politics are viewed as, or like some sort of representation is viewed as a checklist, or it's done in a way that's patronizing to the audience, I think that's what people don't like. Like how, you know, for example, in like Hogwarts Legacy, they had like this like trans character that like had to mention the fact that they were trans. Like, you put that in a story and it can be it's very obvious that like you're putting this in there in order to like be like, oh, look at us, we check the box, right? I didn't care. Yeah, exactly, right? And it's like this was done in a performative way. And I think that people can tell
play
that.
The game, try it out for yourself. It is one of the most original, thought-provoking games I have ever played. I will be spoiling the game now to bring my points across. So if you really want to play the game...
Lazy pandering and it doesn't feel authentic. Exactly. And I think that's really what the problem is. It's that the type of representation that a lot of these games try to achieve is the most inauthentic version of representation, because it's like, you know what it's like? It's like textbook cover representation, where it has like, you know, like a white kid and then like a, you know, a black kid, and then there's a kid in a wheelchair, and then there's like a kid that's like Native American, and then there's somebody else, right? And it's like it's so obviously done for that representation. It's surface level. Yeah, exactly.
Do not want the game spoiled for you, I would recommend jumping to the time as shown on the screen. Spec Ops The Line weaves deep political and moral themes into its gameplay, like the morality of war and the psychological toll of violence. It does this without ever feeling like it is pushing a specific agenda. It doesn't stop the game to
I think that, by the way, is the reason why the Joker 1 was so popular. The Joker 1 was popular because it humanized an experience that a lot of people have without necessarily telling people, like, explicitly that it's like, this is the wrong one, this is the bad guy, you're the wrong guy. It's the same thing with, like, Thanos in Infinity War. And I think that the moment that you patronize the audience to where you can present a villain and then, like, you have to tell the audience this is the villain, I feel like to anybody it's like, wait a minute, we knew this, right? Why are you doing this? Yeah, show don't tell. Exactly.
You at any point. Instead, it allows you to experience the consequences of your actions firsthand, leaving you to reflect on the emotional and moral weight of your decisions.
That's brutal.
That's how it should be done. Similarly, Deus Ex Human Revolution tackles topics like transhumanism and corporate greed, but it does it in a way that allows you, the player, to explore these themes on your own terms. The world
this is like, I cannot express how strongly I agree with this, because it's not even about the fact that like these topics are being brought up. It's the fact that they're brought up in the most cynical and patronizing way possible, and they're told in a completely one-dimensional way that's off-putting.
Complex, and your actions influence the outcomes. It's political, yes, but in a way that respects the player's intelligence and choices. On the flip side though, some modern AAA games miss the mark. Take Far Cry 6 for instance. While it clearly aims to tackle issues like authoritarianism and revolution, the way it handles these themes often feels heavy-handed. Instead of letting players...
I think the reason why, and this is going to sound really bad that I'm saying this, I think the reason why is that a lot of modern writers are really bad at what they're doing, and they're basically theater kids that shouldn't be in the position that they're in. and they don't know how to write good stories, because I think that a lot of like what they believe and like what their ideology is completely performative and fake. They write flaccid stuff. Yeah, they're just bad writers. Straight up bad writers.
Experience and interpret the world for themselves, it hammers home its messages in a way that feels disconnected from the player's agency. The narrative loses subtlety, which takes away from immersion. Now, I mentioned player agency, and for those who don't know, player agency is the degree...
they can't have subtlety. That's the problem, is that these people don't have subtlety. It's because like there's something wrong with them in a lot of cases. I think this is also the reason why a lot of like video games, like for example like Saints Row and games like Spider-Man 2, it's why the character interactions feel so like fake. It's because these people probably in a lot of cases don't know how to make friends and don't know how to act in public. They're like weirdos, basically. So it's like you have a bunch of weirdos, you know, making a story. The story is going to be weird. Yeah, social weirdos, exactly.
The developer gives players to chart their own path through the game. The key isn't to avoid political themes at all. It's to weave them into the fabric of the world in a way that respects the player's experience. Games like The Witcher 3 do this brilliantly, where social and political issues like class struggles and prejudice emerge naturally from the story and the world. You're free to make decisions based on your own beliefs without being told what's right or wrong. This empowers players to make their journey feel personal and impactful. There's a lot of videos and a lot of voices out there saying that there's no space for politics in games. I think what a lot of people are saying is there's no space for you to shove your ideologies or your agendas down my throat. And I agree.
I think that's exactly what it is. That is 100%, 200% exactly what it is. It has nothing to do with the actual politics themselves. It has to do with how they're conveyed. And I think that oftentimes, a lot of times, with many of these types of games, it feels like they're talking down to you. That's the way that I feel. Or it's done in such a patronizing, which is kind of talking down to be fair, or it's done on like a surface level tokenism level.
With this, we can share political themes in a very subtle and thought-provoking way without forcing it on a player. And there are a lot of wonderful examples of this out there.
Yeah.
As we shift our focus again, let's talk about another frustrating trend in gaming: the growing laziness among developers. It feels like we've reached a point now where it's expected that a major release will always come out buggy, unfinished, or lacking core features, only to be patched over time. This wasn't always the case. Back in the day,
I have a lot of sympathy for this because old video games had less variables. And new video games have infinitely more variables, so it would make sense that infinitely more things could go wrong. And I think that you can't scale QA at the same level that you scale those infinite variables. However, sometimes bugs take too long to fix. It's like something should be fixed in like a few days.
DVDs as complete products. When you bought a game, you knew it was ready to go right out of the box. There was no expectation that you'd have to wait for a series of patches just to make it playable. Of course, there's always been a place for alphas and betas in gaming, especially for indie developers. These teams are often working with limited resources and smaller budgets, and they genuinely need the feedback from early access players to help refine their game before a full release. In those cases, early builds and community-driven bug testing make sense.
I think even big games, if they want to have a beta, like WoW has a beta, I think that's something that's almost necessary, especially with such a big game that's like an MMO like that. Even though, like, I kind of wish that games didn't have betas and alphas and they just came out and nobody knew what to expect. Like, that feels a lot cooler. But at the same time, like, I'm okay if there's a beta, right? It's not a big deal. It's not like I'm going to hate the game if there's a beta.
Games are passion projects, and the devs don't have the luxury of massive QA teams like AAA studios do. The alpha and beta phases serve a valuable purpose for them, allowing gamers to help shape the final product. But when it comes to AAA developers, the biggest studios with the biggest budgets, it's hard to justify the current state of things. These companies have huge teams, enormous financial backing, and years of experience in the industry. Yet more and more, we are seeing them release games.
Why is he over there?
that feel unfinished, riddled with bugs, and sometimes completely broken on launch.
Yeah.
It's like going to a bakery, buying a loaf of bread, and finding out it's half-baked. Then you're told to come back and...
I think that, again, if you have some of these issues, it's not that big of a deal. Like, I think glitches absolutely exist on the spectrum, and some glitches are funny, and other glitches are, like, really fucking annoying. So it's like, you can have some that are, like, funny, and it's like, oh, yeah, I remember whenever it used to do, like, this dumb thing. But the problem is that in some cases, the glitches are, like, game-breaking, or they make the experience a lot worse.
A few weeks, a few months, or even a year, so the bake can finish
that's
cooking
kind
it.
of funny.
That's basically what we're dealing with in the gaming world right now, and it's become the norm. Take Cyberpunk 2077 as a prime example. This is one of the most highly anticipated releases of the decade, with CD Projekt Red being a beloved studio after their work with the Witcher series. But when the game launched, it was a disaster on many platforms, especially consoles. Cyberpunk was riddled with glitches, crashes, and performance issues. The game wasn't just buggy, it was borderline unplayable for a large portion of the player base. CD Projekt Red had to issue multiple patches for several months to fix basic functionality, with some of the game's promised features missing entirely at launch.
And this is, I think, also the problem that, like, a game like Cyberpunk 2077, like, the scope of this game is gigantic. Like, it's just, like, such a massive game, and that's, like, kind of what I was saying, is that there are so many variables and there are so many things that are happening, is that, like, if you have a few bugs where it's like a cinematic is bugged out or like a character's walking funny, it's not really a big deal. But what ends up happening is that in a lot of these cases, the bugs are so problematic that they fuck up the entire game. Yeah, the game was broken. Exactly. It's like, I mean, and to be fair, do you want to know one example of that is Elden Ring. Elden Ring had a pretty bad frame rate drop whenever the game first came out, whenever you went outside of Limgrave, which was very problematic because it was right at the beginning when you'd fight Tree Sentinel. We all remember this. And so the stutters, and Black Myth Wukong has like some pretty bad slowdowns and frame drops as well. So yeah, it put me off exactly. And so this happens even with like the really good games. And even remember when Square Enix said we don't need a day one patch for Final Fantasy 16, and then Final Fantasy 16 was like a week before it came out. They're like, okay, we are going to need a day one patch. That's fine. But the issue is like how fast they get fixed and how they rectify the problem with the community. I think that's what's more important, because like I think bugs are inevitable. So it's about like how do you fix the bugs and how do you move on past them.
A small indie studio.
CD
This was a
Projekt Red
massive
they fucked
AAA
up.
developer
Exactly.
that had years to get it right. I am glad for the redemption story that Cyberpunk has now. I thoroughly have enjoyed the game myself. I just
exactly. And like No Man's Sky is the same thing. There have been games that have been recovered and improved in a very big way, and I think that should always be respected. But the problem is that when you do that, it takes so long to rebuild the reputation. It's like it takes you like a few minutes to destroy something, and it can take you like hours to rebuild it. You know, like anything like that. So yeah, it shouldn't be the norm. I think that it's impossible for it not to be the norm until we have some form of scaling AI quality assurance. Because video games are getting increasingly more variables that are just happening, right? Like they're just becoming more complex. Everything is becoming more complex. And you can't scale the complexity. You can't scale QA at the same ratio that you can scale complexity. It's just impossible. So I think that you're going to need to have some sort of mechanical or some form of automation in order to keep up with that. Like I'm just being honest, right? Being realistic.
wish that it didn't launch in the state that it did.
Yeah.
The thing is, we as gamers have come to expect this. We pre-order games knowing full well that they might not be working properly on day one. We accept that the game we paid full price for might not be fully functional until weeks, even months later.
Yep.
This is especially problematic when you consider the fact that many of these games are being sold for $60 or more at launch.
Only 60?
Patching and updates have become a safety net for developers to release half-finished games. And while it's true that no games will ever be perfect, especially when it comes to complex systems, it's also true that we've seen a drop in quality control across the board.
I think that's true. And also, people brought up in chat, they said that it's not just QA. That's not the problem. I think QA is absolutely the problem. And why do I think QA is the problem? I think, number one, it's probably because they hire people that are stupid. And number two, their KPIs, which are basically like, how is somebody that works in QA graded? This has been very common in a lot of companies. Tell me if you've had something like this happen where you work. There is a quantitative metric that your company has created that in the process of pursuing the best outcome of that quantitative metric, you give up the quality of your work. Everybody has had this happen, right? Everybody's had this happen. And so, what do you think? It's different in QA? Of course it's the same thing. Absolutely. So QA is having this exact same problem. So when the metric becomes the target, it ceases to become a good metric. Well, the problem is that when you gamify a job, people start playing the game and they stop doing their job. It's very simple. And so that's the problem with quantitative metrics and grading off of those. And so especially if they're bad metrics, which in a lot of cases they are. So I think QA is definitely set up to fail.
Should be caught during testing phase or making it into the final release. And rather than taking the time to polish a game before launch, developers rely on post-launch patches and updates to fix what should have been addressed earlier on. There's no doubt that games have become more and more complex and ambitious over the years, but it doesn't excuse the laziness that's crept into AAA development. When you're charging players top dollar for a game, you have a responsibility to ensure that what you're delivering is as close to finished as possible on launch.
And that's the thing, is that I think a lot of games, they definitely go to what's called MVP. And we think of MVP like, oh, most valuable player. Think about the opposite of that. Think about minimum viable product. That doesn't really sound very good, does it? Minimum viable product. What's like, you know, how can you get a 70 on a test, right? Like a C minus. Oh man, that's what they're looking at here, and they're releasing based off of that. It's a huge issue. It does to investors, though. Well, the problem isn't necessarily like, I mean, investors wanting something to happen. There are plenty of companies that are publicly traded that don't have these problems. I think that it's a leadership issue. It's a leadership issue, and the leadership issue is exacerbated by shareholders and investors, but it is not defined by them. It's defined by leadership.
Should be used for minor adjustments and unforeseen issues, not to fix broken core mechanics or game-breaking bugs that should have been caught during development.
This game was crap.
As gamers, this is another trend that we've become way too accepting of. We've normalized the idea that buying a game at launch means being a beta tester for a product that should already be complete. This is a shift in the industry that we shouldn't have to tolerate, especially
and it's also that, like, it's so often. Right? Like, I'm not talking about like a couple of little, you know, quirks here and there. Sure, you're going to have mistakes, right? It's fine. But like, man, like there are some games that get released and it's like they just don't work at all. Like, it's just totally fucking broken.
When we're paying full price for these games. Studios need to take more pride in their work, deliver the polished experience they used to, rather than relying on patches to fix what should have been right in the first place. At the end of the day, early access and unfinished products do have their place, where smaller teams need the extra time and player feedback to refine their game. But when AAA companies are releasing half-baked products, it's not because they don't have the resources or talent. It's because they've learned that they don't have to get it right the first time.
That's exactly what it is. It's because people accept a lower quality product. And the reality is that people will accept a game with bugs as long as the bugs are not overly present. Like, there's a couple of quirks or bugs, nobody really gives a shit. But if there's a lot of bugs, no. People are going to be like, what is this? Yeah, game-breaking bugs. Yeah, game-breaking bugs, exactly. Begin to ruin my immersion, exactly. But some bugs can be funny.
As long as gamers keep buying, they can fix things later. And that's a trend that's doing a real disservice to the gaming community. Now, I want to talk about something quite crucial.
And I think also, like, I keep pausing because there's, like, so much I want to say about this. You know what I really hate? Is I hate that these companies want you to be stupid. And they think that you as a player are an idiot. They're like, okay, we're going to put out this game. We know it's bugged, but people are going to buy it anyway because they're dumb. We're going to rely on our mainstream audience. And when they say, like, the mainstream non-invested gamer audience, you know what they're really saying whenever they say that? They're saying we're relying on people that have low information and don't understand what the problems are that will buy the game anyway because they're ignorant. Think about what, like, I mean, really, like, that's basically what they're saying. We're relying on morons to finance us. And they're right. They are until they're not. They were, like, Ubisoft was right until Star Wars Outlaws, and then they weren't right anymore. That's the problem, is that you can rely on that until you can't.
Reason all of these issues exist, from the half-baked games, the lack of innovation, to the increasing presence of cash grab mechanics, comes down to one simple fact.
Isn't Assassin's Creed Valhalla a single-player game? And they're selling skins in this game? Wow.
Fact. We, the players,
XP
vote for the stuff with our wallets. The gaming industry is driven by profits, and as long as these practices are profitable, the major publishers will continue to use them. Let's be honest and real with ourselves. Many of us have bought into these mechanics in the past, whether we have liked them or not. Things like loot crates, battle passes, paid cosmetics, and even DLCs launched on day one have become staples of the AAA gaming industry. We see this across the board, from first-person shooters to sports games. Every time we buy a battle pass, purchase a cosmetic skin, or support a game with these tactics, we're signaling to developers that this business model works. Take EA.
This is one of the big problems, is that the only way that you can really protest against this kind of stuff is by not buying it. Because, like, if a lot of people don't buy it and it actually affects their sales, and it's also, I think it's not enough to not buy the product. So, like, for example, like, this is like with gacha games or with, like, a game like Assassin's Creed Valhalla. You need to not play those games. If you want those games to go away, they will go away instantaneously if people say that they're not going to buy the game because of it. So I'll give you an example. Let's look at the mounts from World of Warcraft. If when they brought out the Celestial Steed in Wrath of the Lich King, if 80% of the player base unsubbed that day, Blizzard would have issued an apology, they would have taken down the store, and they would have given everybody the mount for free, and Bobby Kotick himself would have written a handwritten apology. I'm so sorry for ever thinking I could do this to you. That's what would have happened. For sure. The consumer as a collective always has the power. Shit on the floor. That's right. That's right. All you need to do is get enough people together and you can do anything that you want.
For example, which pretty much has a monopoly on football games through their FIFA franchise, which is now called EA Sports FC. Despite years of player complaints about...
I do feel like maybe that is kind of a monopoly thing, because only one company, EA, is the only company that, like, really has access to that IP, and it's such a big IP. I wonder if that is a monopoly. I don't know. Sure seems like it.
Microtransactions, especially in Ultimate Team, the game continues to sell millions of copies annually. Why? Because football fans want to play football games, and there's no real alternative. Even though there's a ton of backlash...
Well, also, like, let's keep in mind, the FIFA games play well enough to where people enjoy playing them. Like, one of the big reasons why FIFA does well is because it's a game that functions in a way that people feel is sufficient. Yeah, they're good enough.
Against EA's decisions, the football gaming community keeps buying into it. And as long as those sales numbers are strong, EA has no reason to change its practices. This applies to so many other franchises as well. Big publishers know that they can introduce cash grab mechanics like microtransactions. And while they get some pushback online, the sales numbers prove that players are still willing to pay. Whether it's a battle pass in a shooter or exclusive cosmetics in a role-playing game, these systems are designed to exploit FOMO and to keep players engaged long after they've bought the game. The focus has shifted from creating an immersive, complete experience to keeping players in a loop of spending and grinding. And honestly, as long as the majority of players keep voting with their wallets, we can't expect anything to change. Sure, people criticize these models, and we have seen waves of outrage when something like a particularly egregious loot box system surfaces, but that outrage often doesn't translate to change. The truth is, these companies are driven by the bottom line, and as long as
they're gonna keep doing it until they make money on it. Like, if they thought that loot boxes... So there's two ways to make this go away. The best way to make it go away is to make it against the law. I do think that there are two things that should be legally required. I think that you should be legally unable to make a secondary currency for an in-game store. So, like, crystals, gems, anything like that. I think every single thing that's purchasable with real money needs to be purchasable with and only with the local currency. There is no reason for that secondary currency to exist other than to confuse the player into not knowing how much money they're spending. That's it. It only exists to confuse the player. That's all. That's all it does. Nothing else. Number two is that I think if you buy something in a video game, the outcome of that thing that you purchase should be guaranteed. So there should never be a time where you can buy something in a video game and you don't know what you're getting with your money. So like a loot box or even a key to a loot box, I don't think you should be able to sell that because it's fundamentally gambling. Like, that's it. It's literally just gambling. Local currency, a really good point. Yeah, I think so. What about regular gambling? Well, regular gambling is regulated entirely differently. And I think also you could, like, I'm not a big fan of regular gambling either, but regular gambling is advertised towards and also regulated in ways that prevent children from being able to access it. The truth is that a lot of games that have loot boxes are marketed towards and accessible to children in a way that regular gambling is not. Like, for example, like, it's hard to go to the casino if you're 13, but it's easy to play Genshin Impact. Pokemon cards? Well, Pokemon cards, at least you own what you're buying. And I think that you could make that argument, maybe. But what I definitely think that is that if you're doing it inside of a digital space, there's no reason for it to occur. And also, like, with Pokemon, for example, like, you can buy singles of the cards. Like, with this, there's no other way of getting around it. Last loot box I bought? Yeah, exactly. You own cardboard? You do, but it's still something that you own. You have autonomy and you do own it. So either way, those are the two things. Like, I don't think there should be any second... Like, this is the secondary currency here, probably, right? Like, what is 8,059? What does that number mean? Like, why are they legally allowed to have a currency that exists for the sole purpose of confusing you about how much money you're spending? Really, you think about it, right? That's the purpose that it serves. Why is this legal? I mean, really, it's actually crazy whenever you think about it, isn't it?
As these mechanics are profitable, they will continue to exploit them. So if we want to see a real shift in the gaming industry, it has to start with us, the players. We have to make more informed choices about where we spend our money and what kind of games and business practices we support. Otherwise, we're just reinforcing the very trends that we're complaining about. If we want polished games, thoughtful character development, and fair, non-exploitative monetization systems, we have to be willing to vote for those with our wallets too.
That's exactly true. And I think also, like, I don't think that voting with your wallet actually is enough in a lot of these cases. Because, especially with microtransactions, like, if you don't buy them and you're still playing the game, you're effectively not voting. But I think that the only way you can actually make them stop is by making it illegal to sell certain types of things, which I think is incredibly valid. I think that there should be legislation around it, especially with games that target children. Like, I mean, you think about it, right? I mean, you're 8 years old. You've got Logan Paul and Mr. Beast trying to sell you Lunchly. You've got Jack Doherty trying to get you to use your mom's credit card to buy OnlyFans. You're playing video games that are trying to get you to gamble. Like, you're going on to, you know, social media and there's like predators and weirdos on there. You're trying to invest money into cryptocurrency. You're putting your cryptocurrency into stake and you're spending your allowance on stake, gambling. Like, you're on Prime energy drink, your resting heart rate is 163. Like, I mean, you're 8 years old, man. Like, god damn. Yeah, and then, you know, things get stressful for you and you have to take the edge off, and so you do some galaxy gas. Third grade is wild.
Best examples of this has happened recently, with Concord losing on $400 million and having to completely shut
By the way, it was more than that. If you look at the value of the parent company that was acquired, it actually was a lot more than that. I think that there's public filing for it.
Their game down. Leading up to the launch of Concord, we saw people online saying, if you don't like it, don't buy it.
How much more?
This proved to both gamers and AAA companies that players hold the power. After saying all this, and I'll end this the same as how I ended the last video, I am very grateful for the current climate of gaming. I'm having a lot of fun lately playing games developed by smaller game studios. There are still some AAA companies that listen to their fans, and it doesn't feel like they're driven by profit more so than wanting to make good games. Maybe they are driven by profit, but they understand that a good game that is loved by many equals more profit, which is something that I do not understand why other AAA companies haven't come to grasp with.
Because it's hard to do. It's hard to make a good game, and it's easy to make a gotcha system. It's simple. Like, they're just hedging their bets.
To end this video there. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I've really enjoyed having this conversation with you guys. I'm definitely going to be making more videos going forward. I've discovered something I enjoy, and I'm going to just jump on it. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more from this channel, please subscribe below, and I hope you guys have the most amazing day.
I completely agree with everything you said. Like, as a casual player, I think this is way worse, too. Because, like, casual players, the problem is that casual players don't have the ability. This guy had 200 subs yesterday. I guess a lot of you guys from my channel, and I think probably just you through the YouTube algorithm in general, discovered the channel. Now he's got over 7,000. So huge W for everybody who subscribed and supported this. This is awesome to see. It really is. Really, really great videos, really well put together, etc. So yeah, there's the video right there. Make sure to give him a sub, give him a like, etc. That's really, really good to see. So I think, again, the only real way that you can have a, like, I don't know if I want to use this term, a final solution, right, for these issues is by having legislation. You have to legislate this stuff because there will always be companies that will take advantage of it. And the reason why is because it works. Like, why do all these companies use gambling? Because it works. That's why. It's just so common sense, isn't it? So fucking obvious. That's why they're doing it. You're against capitalism? I think that being against capitalism doesn't mean that you allow people to do whatever they want. So a lot of times people conflate capitalism with something like basically a completely free market. And then also another big issue with like people that conflate things with capitalism is that no market truly is free, and a truly free market becomes not free instantaneously. A lot of people have like a very, like, I think, naive view on economics because they've never really played. I think that really the best way to learn economics and like economic theory is to play online video games that have free marketplaces. And then you'll see how and why different rules that we have in like society, why they exist. Like, I remember back in the day, play PoE, play something like this, right, with auction houses. Like, we were price fixing, we were scamming, we were doing all kinds of bad stuff that, like, if we had done that with money in real life, we could have gotten in trouble. Video games provide a basically free marketplace that's actually free to do any of that stuff. A lot of, like, robber baron era scams are just being repeated by crypto people and NFT people. It's like literally the same scam 250 years later. It's not even like, you know, like, oh, this is a little bit different. No, it's we're selling you these stocks and now we're printing a bunch more stocks. Like, it's the exact same thing. You know, it's nuts. Second Gilded Age, exactly. Litigation apparently didn't work. Well, you're always going to need to, it's always a cat and mouse game, right? A lot of so-called capitalists nowadays are Austrian school capitalists, libertarians. Well, I think that a lot of libertarians are people that have never really existed in a free market. And this is like what the problem is that you need regulation. It's like a paradox, but you need regulation to have a free market. Like, a truly free market will never be free because the people that are in control of the free market will make it not free. So it's like you have to legislate these things in order to ensure fairness. It's the same as, like, you know, for imagine like in a boxing match, if you could just bring a gun into a boxing match, well, that wouldn't really be very fair, right? But it's like, you know, that's why you have rules. You have to have rules. There's no such thing as fairness. There absolutely are things like fairness, and there are things that promote fairness more than other things. To say that there's no such thing as fairness, I think that's kind of ridiculous. Like, let's be honest.